President Trump says he directed the Treasury Department to stop minting new pennies. He says the cost of producing the 1-cent coin is too high. Now, last year, the U.S. Mint reported losing more than $85 million on the nearly 3.2 billion pennies. Each penny costs a little less than 4 cents to produce. Joining us for some insight about this move is Michael Surrey, a senior lecturer at the University of Austin McCombs School of Business. Professor, welcome and thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking about pennies here. So there have been talks about getting rid of those for decades now. Can you talk to us about why there is a pushback about potentially halting production?
So I think in general, it does make sense to think about halting production of the penny. But yes, you're right. There has been some pushback in terms of, some of the reasons why people might want to retain it. First of all, people have argued that switching from the penny is going to cause there to be a switch to the nickel. And the nickel also has issues where the cost of producing a nickel is more than the intrinsic value of the nickel itself. Other people have argued that it can be sort of a regressive tax because those that use pennies tend to come from more of the lower income brackets. And as companies perhaps round up prices to the nearest nickel or the nearest dime, those pennies are going to start to add up for those in the lower income levels. Also, many charities get funding from people that leave pennies in jars and donate those to charitable institutions. And finally, I think there is the fact that the penny is one of the oldest coins in circulation. And so from a sentimental point of view, I think a lot of people like to hold on to the penny.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about the problems there that could potentially come if the penny is phased out, or even some of the economic consequences that could come too. Can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. People have argued that there are several fixed costs involved in producing the penny. And so even if the decision is made to halt production on the penny, then there are still a lot of switching costs that will be required to get to the nickel. And some of those are fixed costs. Some are going to be transfer costs that go into switching into the use of the nickel, for example. And so those are hard costs that can't be avoided simply by halting production of the penny. Secondly, in terms of this roundup tax that people talk about, it's essentially saying that, look, there are many people who rely upon the change that you might get. And so if something is priced at $3.47 instead of $3.50, those 3 cents kind of add up. And if you do that over several transactions over the course of a year, it can have a significant impact on those who are in lower income levels. Now, the evidence on that is actually somewhat mixed. Canada kind of went through this in 2012, where they got rid of their 1-cent denomination coin. And the evidence there is mixed in terms of whether or not all transactions were rounded up. Some were rounded up, some were rounded down. In addition, many things here in the U.S. are actually already priced at a rounded level. So things are priced at $4.95 or $5 or $4.99. And so the point is that the delta or the difference that comes from getting rid of the penny may not be quite that significant.
In our final few moments, there's been a lot of discussion about whether President Trump has the authority to kind of take this action or direct the Treasury Department to do something like this. Does the president have the power to end this production? And if not the president, then who does have that authority?
The executive branch actually does have some discretion here. And so the president can direct the Treasury Department and the Bureau of the Mint, which is responsible for producing the coin, to halt production. However, that decision can't be taken unilaterally. Very likely it would require congressional approval. Title 31 of the U.S. Code governs the coinage in the United States. And so while the U.S. Bureau of the Mint is responsible for producing or halting production of the coin, ultimately it would require congressional consent.
Well, Professor Michael Surrey, we will wrap up our conversation there. But thank you so much for joining us to talk more about this. It's been getting a lot of people talking lately, so we appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.